Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. We're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and our website propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on the website, leave us a Google review, and if you're watching on the socials, get involved in the conversation in the comments below. Our email address for discussion topics, hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. You can also pick us up on the move as a podcast every week from the podcast platforms on the other side of the screen there. So let's take a look at this week's property news with Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Paul. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Welcome.
Yeah, and as always, the world of property changes, and we've had some interesting stats over the last couple of weeks, not least, of course, the fact that UK inflation fell to 1.7%. This was about 10 days ago. In September, the lowest rate since April 2021. Lower airfares, we're told, were to support this. They were the main driver, along with petrol prices. And the drop was in the rate was larger than expected. Economists had expected it to go to 1.9%. If you then add into that factor that now, as a result of that, Goldman Sachs are predicting that interest rates might even drop to 2.75%. That is suggesting that we'll get two rate drops, because there's still two more Bank of England meetings between now and the end of the year, and they're suggesting 0.25% at both of those, which will take us down to 4.5% by Christmas. So that's a very different prospect that we've seen, Joe, than we saw maybe a few months ago when we were talking and thinking that rates would stay quite high. But of course, there's an added whammy here. So if a landlord is coming out of the property market because there's just no returns anymore, at least he was comforted by the fact he might get 5 or 6% through investment. But of course, if inflation is going to be falling and interest rates are going to fall as a result, even that avenue is going to be closed off. So what's a landlord to do, Joe?
Well, I smile because this is always the case. We've said, I think throughout all of our programs and throughout the time that we've been doing this, that the government and every successive government has always used the property market as a yo-yo, as a yardstick. And here we are one more time. I'm sure it won't be the last time that they want to use the property market to decide for the future of the country. You know, if we don't build and carry on building, it always causes problems. So just to sort of go back to the points that Goldman Sachs are making about the interest rate potentially coming down, I have always felt and said, and I'll stand by that even for now, that the likelihood of the Bank of England wanting to bring rates down dramatically at this moment in time is probably, there's more chance of another thunderstorm than that is there, because any minute now, our good lady, First Lady, Chancellor will destroy any possibilities of that hope that you're going to have of interest rates maybe coming down, because she will use a massive sledgehammer to crack potentially not even a nut, just because she thinks she can. And so I think the likelihood of interest rates prior to Christmas on 2 drops is very unlikely. But, you know, sillier things have happened at sea, so it's potentially possible that they might consider it, but I can't see how and why. And of course, that will answer the double whammy question in terms of the interest rates for the savers. The problem we have now at large is, and for the last 8-9 weeks, ever since this rumor has been out about the potential budget on the 30th, has had so many different varieties, so many connotations, so many ideas thrown out, but every one of them has one underlining point, and that is rising in taxes. And considering the government came in and said there will be no rises in taxes, all they have spoken about is the rises in taxes. And some of those taxes that they're considering rising are just feeble. They're not even going to bring hardly any money in. But what they will do is probably give enough ammunition to potential people that are on the cusp, on the edge, saying, "Well, shall I stay in the property market for lettings, or shall I not?" And that's probably going to push them over to say, I'll get out of it and save my money and not have to pay the tax in the future." So I can't see where the interest rate will come down. But of course, statistics will say now, if Bob was here, he would say the swap rates are the ones that you got to watch. They're the ones that they can bring down because that's the market, the money market. So potentially, at the moment, people are getting offered 3.5 fixed rates for new borrowers, and perhaps in some places remortgages as well. So that I can see could have some effect, but the actual baseline, I don't see that they would bring it down to as 4.5%, and it's Goldman Sachs is predicting 2.7% perhaps in the next year. It took 18 months of pain to bring the inflation rate down to the level it is. It's going to take the balance of Christmas and Rachel Reeves' budget to push the inflation rate back up again. And I think you'll find that the Bank of England would sit on their hands, and but the market will continue to, guess what they are going to do in terms of the interest rate.
Yeah, they are saying that the money markets had priced in 3.5% by November next year. Goldman are being more aggressive than that, following the comments from Andrew Bailey, where he was saying that they would become more aggressive about reducing borrowing costs at the following meetings. Interestingly, to get to 2.75% by next November, they've got to do a 0.25% reduction every meeting for 9 meetings to get to that point. So that's quite, well, it's not unprecedented because we had, what was it, 14 rises of a
14
0.25%?
rises, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in consecutive months. So it's not unprecedented in terms of changes every month, albeit the opposite direction. But there is the potential that those landlords looking to come out of property and thinking, well, I can get 5-6% somewhere else with my money, and that's roughly what I was getting out of property. So, and I haven't got the hassle of the leaky tap, the euphemus leaky tap. But nonetheless, if they've got a choice of continuing in there and losing money, or going and putting money on 2.5% to 2.75, even 3%, they're stymied either way they go, aren't they?
Well, in all honesty, the damage would have already been done. So it's almost irrelevant whether they want to, because damage is being done, Paul, from the fact that the taxes are being pushed up. And so that's what's been driving landlords to want to come out. Interest rates were, a starting point. The taxes are now the finishing point. And so once they're out, whether they're getting 2% or 2.5%, the likelihood of them wanting to go back into property or buy to let or any of those things is very slim. They may go into development because obviously the government's desperate for more housing. And they might make more money in forming a development company and buying land and building rather than renting. Because obviously their choice of landlord is companies and corporate lets, or just housing associations. They don't want a small 1-2 man hobby landlord, which actually they are absolutely foolish in thinking that that's not the right thing. It has been those people that have invested in the small portfolios that have kept the homeless situation at bay. And now the queues for properties of rental properties and for council homes is so large that the councils cannot cope, which is why, the government is paying hoteliers lots of money to give them accommodation in massive hotels. During the pandemic, hotels were used for asylum seekers. Asylum seekers are still in hotels, and homeless people are in hotels. In fact, the government was paying a better room rate than the public. So major hotel chains decided to shut their hotels and put in a lot of government homeless people into them because they were getting a better room rate per night, per week, per person. In fact, to such a point that I've known of some hoteliers and hotels have done that for the last now, what, 4 years, and they made enough money to clear their debt and refurbish their hotels even after they were turned into dumps by the people that were renting for the short term through the government. That's how much money the government has thrown at hoteliers because there is nowhere else for these people to go to. So, all of their policies are wrong as far as housing is concerned. They just don't give it any thought, and it's basically pooing, and I'm being polite there, on the plate that's feeding them, because these private landlords are the ones that are basically keeping the housing market at a level because their interest and their investment provides homes when the government cannot provide decent living accommodation, let alone new ones. They can't even provide good repaired homes that they already own.
There's interesting on the other side of things facts that talk about the fact that, for example, regular pay is still at 4.9% in the 3 months to July. So the increase in annual inflation in pay, regular pay, up 4.9%. That is slowing. It was at 5.1% in the previous quarter. And that was the lowest level in terms of the rate of pay increase since June 2022, although it's still 2.6% above the CPI inflation rate. So wages are still in excess of where inflation currently is. So there is still some danger in the waters, one would suggest.
Yes, quite clearly. Look, I mean, last 18 months, there's been, strikes and non-stop of public work, etc., where people have said, "No, we don't want to come and work." Doctors, nurses, all of these people have had wage rises. And those wage rises were done at the latter part of the Conservatives. Even now, as the Labour got in, they've just done a wage rise for doctors and for railway workers fairly quickly. They found the money to do that. So, they all want to keep the wages right, which is fine. I understand that people got to earn good money to be able to deal with these things, but they're not thinking about the housing market, which is what fuels the rest of it. And I've always said that the housing market is a bit like the hub of a bicycle. It's the main bit, and then everything else comes off of it. Because if the housing market isn't being operated in a correct way, then people like the carpet companies, the window companies, kitchen companies, everything that comes off of it will start to slow down. So I really don't feel that either of them have given thought. But I will say that we are at 1.7% inflation rate, thanks to some of the measures that were put in towards the end by the outgoing government. This is not an effort done by Labour. You're about to see a car crash of what Labour are about to do, a bit like Liz Truss did. So I think, and a lot of people are sitting on their hands, Paul. For the last 8, 9 weeks, if I haven't heard it once, I haven't heard it a million times. I'll make a decision once I know what the budget says at the end of that. Now, you ask yourself, what is this budget going to be? He's saying that it's going to make a drastic decision. But yes, people are concerned. They are concerned what she's going to open her mouth to and what we're going to end up having to pay for, and what taxes are going to come up and what people's decisions will be. So the point about the 2.75 Goldman Sachs and the bank coming down, I just can't see as a layman, and I'm not sitting here as a financial expert. Just as a layman, I cannot see what would drive the Bank of England and the governor there to think that whilst he's just got it to this level, people are getting comfortable and acceptable to a 5%. Perhaps first-time buyers are getting a good fixed rate because the swap rates are good. Why do I want to fix something that's actually not broke at the moment? Because that's what they will do.
Well, they reckon 80% of financial economists have agreed there'll be at least one more cut before the end of the year. So even if we're cautious. We'll have a 4.75% rate by Christmas, maybe 4.5% if we think there's going to be another one. What's interesting is also looking at the housing market as such. With that prospect in mind, it's going to be good news for agents, and some are saying they've already seen some green shoots of more people phoning up and asking for viewings, etc., more buyer interest as a result. So I suppose that has to be the positive side of it all.
Yes, look, my days of estate agency was a bit more touchy-feely, a bit more real. State agency today is manipulated by graphs and stats and how many phone calls you're getting and how many times the phone is ringing and all that kind of stuff. It's a very, very different place. And what they come up with, in my opinion, is pie in the sky ideas. The basic hasn't changed. The basic is about supply and demand. When the demand is high and the supply is limited, house prices do tend to find their way on the rise. Right now, there is a good supply. And because there's a good supply, there's more choice, and people are perhaps coming onto the housing market looking to buy a new property. The flip side of that is equally, perhaps more than 50% at least, and if not at least 50%, are fall throughs. So one week you might show that you made 10 sales, and the following week you might see that those 10, 5 have fallen out of bed because somebody couldn't get their mortgage, or they've had a fallout, or their circumstance. So that's the stats. That's the rubbish stats that people put up. And the media likes stats, that, because if something is not true, it's rubbish, they sell better than what is reality. Now, if the reality was what I'm saying, and that is that, there might be 10 sales, but maybe 5, even possibly 6 may fall through by the end of the week, if not early part of next week. That doesn't result in a housing market going up. But this week, because you've done 10 sales, and if everybody did 10 sales, all of a sudden the housing market's on the up. But next week, the housing market's going to be on the down, because 50% of those are probably going to fall out because they couldn't get their finance, or they didn't pass their credit, or whatever those circumstances might be, didn't happen. So, they have this hype to report. Now, when I was selling, and I still sell houses, I look at what's actually happened and what is in the drawer and what's going to go, as opposed to what is potentially not going to go. It's the same as the conveyancing system. We've talked about the conveyancing system umpteenth times now. We know that today you might think that all of it is put together. So everybody looks at it and go, great, we've got a sale. That one's done. Acacia Avenue is done. It's in the hands of the solicitors, and the mortgage broker's going to do their bit. And then all of a sudden, this deck of cards slowly starts to fall. The broker turns around and says, well, actually, I can't place it with that company because their credit didn't fit with that one. So we're going to try it with this one. The interest rate's going to be high. The buyer then turns around and says, well, I can't afford that extra interest rate. So that's a fall through. The sale goes to a solicitor. Solicitor actually sits on his butt for the God knows how long, eventually gets a contract out. Sale falls through. These are not real life situations that are presented by these guys that create these stats. The real life is that, if you are running a business, you're going to run it on the basis of reality. And the reality is that, not every one of them is turning into a sale. So I guess I'm probably cautious, but then part of my job is to be cautious, and part of my job is to put reality here, which is why I do this, is to make sure that people understand that it is, not always possible to do those, and you do need to take the right advice, and you do need to be cautious, and you do need to get a good broker to make sure that your finances and your funds are available before you actually proceed to the next stages. Until then, it's hope.
Let's move on to someone you mentioned earlier on, Mr. Mr. Starmer. He's in the news this week because he's saying that owners of rental property and shares could be punished in next week's budget after Prime Minister Keir Starmer hinted that he did not consider them working people, because this was the thing they were saying, we're not going to tax working people. He promised that he would not increase taxes on working people, ruling out rises in income tax, national insurance and VAT. But he did say this last week that he didn't consider anyone who owns shares and rental property a working person, which led to claims that capital gains tax rises could be in the budget, which of course is next Wednesday, the 30th of October. Hence our theme today on the show. CGT is levied, of course, on the sale of the most personal possessions worth £3,000 or more, including second homes, shares not held in an ISA and business assets. He said he believed a working person was someone who goes out and earns their living, usually paid in some kind of monthly cheque, but they did not have the ability to write a cheque to get out of difficulties. Asked by Sky News whether he would classify a working person as someone whose income was derived from assets such as shares or property, he said, well, they wouldn't come within my definition. It's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, you can see the reasoning in his argument, but I just keep going back to the days of Margaret Thatcher when we were encouraged to invest, encouraged to take ownership in property, and encouraged to take ownership in public companies. And yet now, having done that and been advised that that's the wise thing to do, they seem to want to take it all back off you.
Well, yes, I mean, I think he's got it, again, very wrong already. He's, again, punishing, all the wrong people, or he's letting go of the people that perhaps shouldn't be. It's every time we've had a prime minister, to a large extent, they are prime ministers that actually have no experience in what I call life. They've never run a company, they never really employed people. They got voters to vote them in because they made lots and lots of promises. And actually, the question you ask yourself, or I ask myself certainly, is would I be putting Keir Starmer at the helm of a major PLC that is making profits and losses? And yet we put him at the top of our government that makes all our decisions for our country and our lives. And to be honest with you, in reality, I it was never my choice. And as far as I'm concerned, he and his chancellor and his deputy prime minister are doing a grand job at this moment in time in messing up what was not required to be fixed. They just needed to go forward and work on that. But they've got to always show that they're different. And in order to show that they're different, there are innocent people that get punished, like these people that are classified as not workers, when actually, when you think that people that have invested in their property, they have invested or in their shares, or however they get their income, that is their source of income, and they declare that on their taxes. So, if he's happy to take their money in their income taxes, why would he not be considering them as people that are workers and not workers? It just doesn't make sense to a layman like me. I just think he's just playing on words. The majority of them are simply playing on words. And when we talk about Margaret Thatcher and say that she, made some radical changes in the idea of people wanting to buy, Margaret Thatcher probably was the mouthpiece that delivered that message. People have always wanted to buy their own home. It wasn't nothing to do with Margaret Thatcher. Before Margaret Thatcher arrived in 1980, do you think people were not buying their homes? For the last 50 years before that, they always wanted to buy their home. Everybody wants to own their own home and progress in their life. So I think
She was responsible for bringing more people into that home ownership thing by the sale of the council houses, and she was the one that introduced the buying into public companies. That was the point.
yes, no, I get that. And as I said, she was the mouthpiece that delivered that idea even more than it was. But the point I'm making is that people were still doing it anyway. I mean, companies existed. People bought shares prior to Margaret Thatcher, and people bought houses prior to Margaret Thatcher. But she was the vocal piece to say that this should be the norm. People should do this anyway. And they probably, they needed a leader to tell them that, and that's what they did.
What's interesting to me, and the fundamental problem with the argument is that if he says that, you go to work and you get a paycheck at the end of the month, and that's a working person, there are plenty of people in the banking industry, for a start, who are earning £250,000 a year. And they get a check every month, but they're a working person under his definition. If I earned,
Yes.
let's say, 60,000 a year, but decided to buy a property and put some of my money into shares, I'm going to be punished, and yet I've never earned anything near the money that the person on 250's earned.
Precisely that, Paul. That's what I'm trying to say. That it shouldn't there shouldn't be a difference, but they choose to make that difference because they find that that is a loophole that feels that they can punish you for your extraterrestrial income that they think. So you have a salary that you're paying your PAYE national insurance on, and then you've got some stocks and shares, or you've bought some property investments, and then they feel that they can penalize you again for your CGT, your capital gains on that, even though you have paid again tax when you bought those properties. You bought stamp duty, you paid stamp duty, you paid, other taxes, and you've been paying your taxes under the income rule, on your PAYE and national insurance contributions. It's just another way to rob further money.
Let's just have a look at the CGT potential hike. This is a piece in Mortgage Solutions this week. It's quite interesting, actually, because it says, with Reeves now planning to raise a revised 40 billion to plug the gap in the public finances, the need to use CGT as a tool to hit the target is clear. But would it be effective? HMRC modelling of the fiscal impact of different tax changes found that a 1% point increase in the higher rate of CGT effective from April 2025 would generate an estimated £100 million in 27-28. A 10-point rise in percentages terms would see revenue fall by 2 billion the same year. So these figures look really underwhelming at best, and Reeves must also consider the unintended consequences of such a move, says Mortgage Solutions. And in learnings from the past, an example can be seen in two policy changes introduced midway through the last decade. The first saw mortgage interest relief restricted to the basic rate of income tax, and the second was the introduction of a 3% surcharge on stamp duty. Industry data on buy-to-let property purchases highlights how the changes have led to a disproportionate effect on regional investment, with the North West, North East and Yorkshire and Humber overtaking the South as the region seeing the greatest proportion of buy-to-let purchases over the last decade. This is because the affordability of property in the North remains. That means that the policy has not increased northern landlords' tax burden to the same degree as those with houses in the south. Same can be accepted with CGT. Analysis from the wealth management company Quilter forecasts that the move would increase landlords' tax bills by £11,000. So we do get this regional differential, Joe, where we've got landlords in the north, because of the price of the property, they fall beneath some of these thresholds. And yet, of course, in London and the southeast, where properties go whack bang into the middle of all these thresholds, they're being unfairly targeted from a regional perspective because of the house price.
Clearly doesn't have a leveling up action in this situation, does he? I mean, there's no leveling up. If Gove was here, he'd be looking to level this up and say the North should be punished as much as the South. But Mr. Starmer has taken the leveling rule out and decided that the South needs to pay because the North is perhaps poorer. And that's a Labour standing. We know that the Labour are stronger in the North, and that's what they're going to do. This is not a mathematical thing. This is more of an emotional and personal thing that really comes down to the fact to rob the rich to pay the poor. He's trying to be the Robin Hood of the day, and so I think that when you look at the amount of money that CGT is actually going to raise, it's going to cost them probably more in employing the right people to go out and police that than is the amount that they're going to actually collect. But in the meantime, what they will do is do a grand job in making sure that small landlords exit in the south. They may consider repurchasing in the north, but managing north to south properties is a challenge in itself. I have many clients that have owned properties or still own properties and find it hard to even find the time to travel up to go and deal with them. It costs them over a day or two's worth of work to go and deal with something that is actually bringing them small amounts of money. So it's a good idea, I suppose. In a fairy tale book, it will be great. you've got lots of property in the north and you live in the south and everything's hunky dory. But managing those is a big challenge. And I think the amount of CGT raised from properties that are in the south is insignificant in the bigger picture. There are many other things that they could probably consider doing. In fact, if anything, they should do it the other way around. They should motivate the people in the south to want to invest in the rest of the country.
It's just to clarify on what this company Quilter was saying. So the average across the whole of the UK would have been a landlord increase in tax by £11,000. Just to put that in perspective, the north-south divide, if you're in London, your CGT could hit 21,440. Whereas in the southeast it would be 16,000. Let's just compare that with the northeast. In the northeast it would be £4,320. If you're in Yorkshire, it would be 7,840, and if you bought in the Humber and Northwest region, it would be 8,560. So £21,000 is your increase in CGT in the south, 4,320 if you're in the northeast. Just doesn't seem right.
It's nearly 4 times, isn't it?
Yeah. It is quite extraordinary. And it's interesting that small and medium landlords in England and Wales are estimated to contribute 45 billion a year to the UK economy. So it's serious business, as you were saying, propping up the housing market in terms of the rental market, aren't they?
They just don't see it, Paul. Honest to God, I don't understand it. As I said, I'm no mathematician or scientist in this, but I can see as a layman, they are, fixing something that is actually not broke. And for all the wrong reasons. I will say it here today. I'll see a reversal of this within the next year, 6 months. They would have no choice but to reverse half of these things that they're trying to do, because I think the market will just fall on its knees. All these potential sales people are talking about are happening, are going to be fall throughs. Money isn't going to be as cheap as they think it's going to be. I think the Bank of England will sit on their hands for a while. And I think, this is just the honeymoon period, the 100 days or the first 6 months of what the new government is bringing in. They're trying to sort of, beat their chest and say, here we are, we're going to do this. But I think that they will reconsider very, very quickly.
Well, you heard it here first. The man has spoken. We'll see what happens. And also, of course, we look forward to next week's Property Matters, when we'll have the information from the budget, which is on Wednesday, the 30th of October. So looking forward to that very much indeed. We hope to have you with us for the next Property Matters.